All right, so for this episode of the podcast, I'm getting together with my good friend and co-host, Steve Prosperi, to talk about a book called Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life, written by William Finnegan. Really, this book is a memoir, and a memoir about a guy's life. He was born in the mid-20th century and grows up in Southern California, in Hawaii, and it's really the story of him growing up paralleled by this obsession he has with surfing. And he really started surfing before Quicksilver and before the World Surf League and before surfing was what it is today, which is this very cool, trendy, attractive sport. He was really surfing when it was unknown. And it wasn't something people knew about. And Steve and I really go back and forth on our thoughts about the book, some of the relationships in the book that I found to be some of the strongest parts of the writing is the way the author talks about the relationships he has with girlfriends, with friends, with his daughter, his wife, and then also, of course, the way he talks about surfing. Of course, I'll read you guys the inside pamphlet of the book, the synopsis. Barbarian Days is William Finnegan's memoir of an obsession, a complex enchantment. Surfing only looks like a sport. To initiates, it is something else entirely. A beautiful addiction, a demanding course of study, a morally dangerous pastime, a way of life. Raised in California and Hawaii, Finnegan started surfing as a child. He has chased waves all over the world, wandering for years through South Pacific, Australia, Asia, Africa. A bookish boy and then an excessively adventurous young man, he went on to become a distinguished writer and war reporter. Barbarian Days takes us deep into unfamiliar worlds, some of them right under our noses off coasts of New York and San Francisco. It immerses the reader in the edgy camaraderie of close male friendships annealed in challenging waves. Barbarian Days is an old-school adventure story, an intellectual autobiography, a social history, a literary road movie, and an extraordinary exploration of the gradual mastering of an exacting, little understood art. Today, Finnegan's surfing life is undiminished. Frantically juggling work and family, he chases his enchantment through Long Island ice storms and obscure corners of Madagascar. And I think that's perfect. I mean, that's right from the publisher Penguin Press themselves about what this book's about. It's by far one of the better books I've read in recent history, and the discussion it spurns, not just about the book, but about all the ancillary subjects in the book, I found really interesting, and I think it was a great conversation with Steve. So without further ado, here's the Gramercy Reading Club.
It's funny reading that back panel talking about New York, San Francisco, Simone Fishing Village, and I mean I didn't finish reading the book that long ago, but it kind of just took me back through some of those places. Kind of, I guess, my initial comment on the book. Yeah, he's so descriptive in all these places he describes. Even just repeating the titles, I'm kind of remembering his surfing stories and kind of other stories from those places. Kind of cool to just get taken back right from the back panel of a book I've already read.
Yeah, it really jumps you right back into his prose is so descriptive. It's so, you really feel like you're with him, whether you're on the wave, whether you're, in a fishing village, you're learning about your girlfriend cheating on you with your best friend. Like these, and
just so nonchalantly dropped on you in there.
Hashtag spoiler alerts. I think that's something we should get out of the way pretty early on in this podcast, is that, like, I guess we're going to assume that most readers have read the book and they're keeping up with us. So if you do plan on reading, Barbarian Days isn't Game of Thrones. It's not like, oh my God, crazy spoiler alerts. But, we're going to talk about things that happen in the book. So, but yeah, his prose is so detailed, and the imagery that you get from, the way he writes, it's really powerful.
Yeah, you constantly find yourself wondering, is this a writer who also surfs, or is this a surfer who also writes? And
totally
kind of go back and forth on it, because at first you're like, okay, well, the descriptions of these waves, while they're exactly back to the prose kind of comment, clearly a writer here, but then just their knowledge of the wave itself is clearly a surfer, and kind of just that back and forth is exciting, to be honest.
And that, it's 100%. I was curious, I think you said it exactly. Is this a surfer who's writing? Is this a writer who's surfing? Or maybe we're limiting ourselves by thinking he has to be either. Yeah. Maybe he can be both simultaneously.
Great point. And and kind of something to, I've talked to a couple people who've read this book, personally loved it, just come out and say that.
Yeah, of course.
Most people I've spoken to at least liked it a lot, but the only real criticisms that I've heard about it are that, I just read this biography about William Finnegan. I want to know more about who he is. He just brushes over these whole parts of his life. And I kind of refer back to the fact that it's called Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life. I've never spoken to William Finnegan, but I imagine he wouldn't describe this book as an autobiography, more of a memoir of his surfing life, which he kind of points out is separate from his other life or lives, if you will, his family life. I mean, he briefly touches on some of his siblings, his daughter, but that's kind of, definitely secondary. And
what do you make of him being so dismissive is the wrong word, because anytime he mentions a girlfriend, mentions a wife, mentions a child, or even a brother or sister for that matter, it's not that he's dismissive, but it's such a passing thing. It's like, oh, let me mention my daughter so I can get back to talking about surfing. What do you make of that? Do you think that that's emblematic of him having a tough relationship with some of these people, or,
Yeah, I'm sure that plays into it, but he's non-apologetic or mostly non-apologetic about his passion for surfing, but does point out that, passion for something doesn't necessarily make it good. I mean, it's almost like an addiction at points. And it's not, he talks about a story where he gets caught under a wave, and this is after, 40 years probably at this point of near-death experiences that he's described to us. And only then does he briefly speak about, whoa, I can't do this. I have a daughter. I need to be there for her. But, it doesn't really take him out of the action for that long. He's back surfing again in no time. So it's kind of a fleeting thought. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he claims that this surfing is superior to everything else in life. I think there's points in it where he points out that it's kind of thrown him off, or he's done things he regrets because of it.
For sure. And that's like the only point in the book where he has like some acknowledgement of some other person while surfing.
Yeah.
Like that's not a fellow surfing bro.
Yeah, I mean, I love the he's traveling Europe with his girlfriend around. This is early in the book. Around late high school, early college, traveling Europe with his girlfriend, and just like leaves her, and just
goes.
Had to catch some waves.
Hey,
sorry,
I'm gonna go not like hang out with you and ride some waves. So good luck in the middle of this random European country.
But yeah.
So let's talk about. I mean, I would argue, interested in your input here on like probably the most important character outside of the author himself is Bryan D. Salvatore.
I would agree. Yep.
They have a really strong male relationship based not entirely, but based like around two main things: surfing and literature.
Yeah.
They talk a lot about books. I think what they say, they met when they were at a party, and like, first of all, it's 2017. Like, no one's bringing books to parties, at least the parties I don't go to. I don't know, Marcel, do people bring books to the parties you go to? Never. Okay. No. So good. It's not just a me thing. So I don't know who brings books to parties. Point being is that, what was it? William saw Bryan with a book he liked to read.
Yeah, I forget what book, but I mean, for sure that's what sparked up their conversation. They were both got into a deep debate about the literary importance of Burroughs or something like that.
Right. And so from there they became really good friends, and they essentially go.
Well, if you recall, he gives him his car. Like Bryan gives him his car for and says like, "Pay me, send me a check someday to Idaho." Yeah.
Was that in Hawaii?
That was in Hawaii.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, they were in Hawaii. So at this time, William's with his girlfriend, right? In Hawaii. Bryan's like, "Yeah, here's my car," and then they, I think so. Kind of going off topic of Bryan, but like something that's so interesting that's just not a thing anymore is writing each other letters. They wrote each other handwritten letters and sent them to each other to stay in touch.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this once previously, kind of just off the record, if you will. And we're like, yeah, people don't write each other letters anymore. We're like, oh yeah, we got texts and emails. And it's like, well, we don't really email each other or text each other like that.
For sure, don't email my friends.
Yeah.
I definitely don't.
I mean, he's talking about pages at a time, 15-page letters. And
I think there's something to be said about putting your thoughts into like such a long format where it's like not just a quick, hey, what are you doing? Whatever.
Smiley face.
Emojis. Gotta use those emojis. Type. I think there's something to be said about that. But anyway, so Bryan and William become really good friends. They travel all around the world. What are your thoughts on the relationship? Is it you know, if there's no surfing, are those two guys still best friends, or do they come together through surfing? What are your thoughts on that relationship throughout the book?
It's for sure an interesting one. I mean, William has every in his telling of it, right? We only know his side of the story, so he kind of controls how the relationship is perceived, and he doesn't show it as a particularly great one, and he doesn't really blame the other guy, and he also doesn't really blame himself, which kind of just makes it feel really genuine, because I think that's how relationships are. Everyone's a little bit at fault. I think for sure the surfing keeps them together, because especially early on in their trip, you kind of wonder, like, why are they still doing this? No one's really having fun here. But every time they find a wave, it's like that all goes away for a minute.
Totally. They're like bickering and mad at each other about little things, and then the wave totally eclipses whatever small interpersonal issues they may be having.
Yeah. And, I mean, they talk about when they get to the place in Fiji, right, the perfect wave. And kind of for 20 pages on either side of that whole perfect wave scenario, there's very little anything going on besides waves and perfect surfing. I mean, and it kind of becomes, I think, what proved out the whole trip for them, the real purpose of the trip. They found it. And kind of going forward in the sections of the book past when he's dealing with Bryan, you know, he'll just talk about writing a letter to him or whatever, and that's always what they have together. Like, we'll always have, you know, that perfect wave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like such a unifying thing. And I think, you know, a lot of guys, and I mean, anyone can relate to that. It's where, like, you have this thing between friends that really bonds you. It's like that shared love for a common interest that brings them together. I think that's so important to Bryan and William's relationship here in the book.
I just kind of, so Bryan was his first non-childhood real male relationship we'll talk about. And to anybody that didn't read the book, I think it's important. We kind of joke when we talk about it. And he's got an interesting view to his male relationships, and you're reading them, you're like, oh, is he gay? At first had that, and I don't think he is. He actually explicitly, like, talks about other people, so he's not. But there is something to be said about the male relationships in here. Maybe it's just honesty is what it is, I think.
Yeah, I mean, #2017, we're open, and everyone's open to all type of relationships, and so I don't think this question is posed to say, like, oh, is, like, you know, in, like, some type of judgmental way. It's just curious. It's like, because the intimacy of the relationship far outreaches any intimacy I've ever read in any book. Like, you know, you read a book like, you know, any like a Tom Clancy book or something. I haven't even read any Tom Clancy books, but I'd imagine a Tom Clancy book, there's male. But it's a very intimate relationship, and they really talk about, like, the feelings exchanged between these two guys in a way that would, like, maybe make you think, like, you know, was this more than just two friends?
I think it's just unfiltered is what it is, right? I think it's not that different than a real relationship between two guys.
For sure. And for me, it was, you know, it was enlightening to see that, because I think, you know, especially if you have friends outside of just, you know, locker room buddies or oh yeah, you know, we play basketball together once a week. If you have, like, true friends, like, I think you can relate to some of this of, like, being best friends with someone else. And I mean, you know, I think this is specifically talking about guy-to-guy relationships, but it doesn't matter the gender. But, like, being best friends with someone and, like, not agreeing on everything, being upset at each other and being annoyed with each other, but, like, still having that underlying, like, understanding. It's like, yes, we're annoyed about each other right now in this moment, but we're still friends, and, like, will always be friends. And hey, maybe we won't see each other for 3 months, but we're always going to be friends. And the way he puts that pen to paper on that, I think, was amazing.
Yeah, and kind of an observation I had is so there's 10 chapters, right, and they each have a name: Off Diamond Head, Smell the Ocean, Jacques Canoe, and below it they have a kind of time frame and a location. So you know, Honolulu, the second tour, California, Maui, South Pacific, Australia, so on. And while you could break it up by kind of the locale of where he is and where he's surfing primarily, I kind of noticed in each of these chapters there's also a main male counterpart, if you will, or relationship there, which is I think an interesting way to tell a story, whether it was intentional or not. I'm sure it was to a certain extent. But when you, like, think back about periods of your life, you know, when I was in college, those were my days in college, right? You think about who your friends were then and, like, who you associated with. For sure. And especially in the context of just his surfing life, right? Because it talks about constantly how solitary of a sport surfing is. But also all his best times when he's doing it, he's never alone, right? So you need to be alone in the water with someone a little bit.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you say that, it immediately makes me think of Into the Wild. Yeah. When, you know, Hashtag spoiler alert. He says at the end, he says, happiness is only real when shared.
Yeah.
You can have so much happiness and enjoyment, only so much happiness and enjoyment alone. It's kind of like you need that other person to bounce it off of. So I hear that. For sure.
I actually I love that book, Into the Wild. And kind of very similar. Christopher McCandless. Yeah.
Christopher McCandless. Shout out.
Played beautifully by Emil Hirsch, right?
Emil Hirsch. What is that guy up to? When's the last time you've seen Emil Hirsch?
What are the movies you've seen Emil Hirsch? Emil Hirsch has been in Girl Next Door and Into the Wild.
Emil Hirsch. Guess what the first question is? How tall is Emil Hirsch?
Oh, definitely 5'6" then.
5'7", pretty close. I'm going to do a quick Emil Hirsch on the news, see what he's up to.
Eddie Vedder soundtrack in that movie, too.
Emil Hirsch worries hipsters don't watch horror movies anymore. Word.
So not that much is the answer.
Yeah, not that much. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay. No. March 30th, 2017. Emil, if you're out there, we miss you, bro.
Love to have you on the show.
You did amazing work in Into the Wild. Cool, man. Back to the book. So, any things that like stuck out to you want to hit on in this wonder? I mean, maybe this hasn't been said yet. I love this book.
Yeah,
I think sometimes I loved reading this book. I asked my girlfriend. She was like, "I want to shut the fuck up about talking about it." I was like, "Oh, babe, I read this thing, like in this chapter, and he's talking about this and that, and it's just like, it's good." I really liked it. So
relatively early in the book, I got kind of jealous. He's talking about. Kind of at first glance, the moral of the story is he's talking about breaking one of his first boards kind of thing and hitting his first huge wave in Hawaii. I think it's Hawaii at least. Don't quote me. Cool. Kind of getting down a huge like wave front, right? And he goes down it and he gets launched off midwave. Kind of doesn't really know why. Comes up from the wave and sees that his board is like entangled, like literally in halfway through another board, one of his buddies. And kind of pointed out they're lucky that none of them were hurt because his tail fin went through a solid board and was stuck together. But he ends the quote with, that his friend wasn't mad that he broke his board. After all, prior to him, running into his friend's board, he was staring God in the face, and like that's how
staring God in the face
going down that wave. And I mean, it was like the most monstrous wave he had ever taken down, but. I don't know if I've ever done anything in my life where I can say with confidence I was staring God in the face, right? Short of like almost being in a car accident and dying kind of thing. But this is like, I mean, he does this maybe it's a testament to kind of how crazy surfers are, but to want to regularly embrace something where you think you're staring God in the face. I mean, bold claim.
The best view of oneself is beyond the edge of looking back.
Was that William Finnegan? Is that in here?
No, I don't know what that was. But no, I mean... I think that was from a poster in my older brother's room, whose office we're in right now. So it's kind of come full circle.
There you go.
Yeah, it's what draws one to want to push themselves to the edge like that so frequently. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever felt that like perfect mixture of danger and stimulation? And yeah, I agree. I don't think I've ever stared God in the face. But have you ever had that feeling where it's like adrenaline, fear, excitement?
I for sure had snippets. I mean, maybe an extreme, but everyone remembers, Friday night football in high school, right? Sure. And you have that feeling on the field. Friday night lights essentially was how to describe it. Yeah. And you kind of feel like, whoa, I'm the one right now. I mean, it's pretty small scale, but I imagine it's kind of along those lines. I mean, and scale that up too, right? You go to your first job interview and you're like, I want this job. I can take it right now. And kind of whenever you feel like you're performing at your peak, I think it's similar. I think surfing seems like a pretty good outlet for that kind of thing. Keep in mind, I've tried surfing once, and the only thing I stared in the face was myself in the mirror when I was disgraced after how bad it was.
True. I echo that, man. I've gone surfing, so I grew up on Long Island. And so I've gone surfing a fair amount of times, less than 10 for sure. And it was always pretty mild when I went, but I remember specifically one time I went and it was the middle of the summer. Maybe I was going to freshman year of college, and it was big. It was big waves. In the words of William Finnegan, it was like, what was it? Refrigerator?
The double refrigerator.
Yeah, it was a double fridge. Because it was coming in real hot. And, you know, my personality, we've gone snowboarding before. I'm just going to push it and like I'll fall if I have to, but I'm going to fall instead of like playing it safe. Yeah. So I go out there with like a big old board. I'm probably 235 at this point.
A gun, right? A gun, if you will.
Yeah, I was on a gun. I'm heavy myself. And so like not only is the board heavy, I'm a thick guy. I just got off a mean high school football career. So I'm up in that 235, 240 range. And these waves are coming in hot, like real hot. And so I decided I'm going to try it. I go out there, I'm paddling out, exhausted, shoulders burning. I don't have asthma, could still use an inhaler. It's getting real tough. But eventually I get on a wave and I ate shit. Like I really ate shit to the point where it hurt. I fell, the board like smacked my elbow, and like I thought I could tough it out, and I quickly realized how, one, out of control I was of the surrounding element, the water, the board, the wind, and two, just how out of my league I was. And I was scared. Like I was definitely shook. I rode the board back in and like laid on the ocean or laid on the beach for like 10 minutes just out of breath. Like whew, that was scary. So when he starts talking about some of these, you know, was it a double hold down?
Yeah.
Double tie down. I felt it, and it's scary. It's scary stuff, man. Scary stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't even seem like that rare of an occurrence kind of thing. I mean, he rarely, kind of something I liked is that he rarely addresses his own skill level. Sure. So it's not like braggy in any way.
Super humble.
At a certain point, though, you got to wonder. I mean, not being a surfing expert myself, I'm going to go ahead and venture out and say he's pretty damn good compared to the average, just given the places he's surfed and the things he's done.
Totally.
But it's in almost every location, in almost every big story that he's talking about or location where he's surfing, there's a close call there. I mean, most of them he's hurt. Even on good days, you know, he's walking out with some battle scars that I'd be done. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? We go snowboarding together sometimes, and you roll your ankle pretty good. You're locking it in for the weekend. It's not worth it. Yeah, exactly. But he's talking about coming out. He's talking about coming out with like 4 sea urchins in his feet and like infected. You know, they're in Fiji and he's got an infected back. Yeah. I mean, he ends up in a hospital for a month or something in Southeast Asia. I mean,
for real, he really does, and he's a tough dude.
Yeah,
he's a tough dude, and he just keeps. Where does that come from? Where does that drive come from to get messed up like that and go back out?
That's why I'm saying it seems like an addiction to me, right? Because that's the only other parallels you can draw. Let's talk. We should talk about the what's his name in San Francisco? Mark, is that his name?
The doctor.
The doc.
Yeah, the doc.
Doc.
The doc's a beast.
Yeah,
Doc's a beast.
He's and you know, so throughout the whole book, they're talking about going to Fiji and these double overhead waves and like 15-foot waves, and these guys are just surfers. And then we start talking about Doc, who's a big wave surfer.
He's a big. That's a capital B, capital I, capital G. Big wave surfer.
Big wave. So I mean, so what were these other guys? You know, if he's a big wave surfer, and so it's making me picture these like frigid, gross brown water in San Francisco.
It's definitely brutal. But yeah, talk about the Doc. What'd you think about him?
That guy is. I think it's interesting. I think everyone, at least personally, I feel like everyone knows someone kind of like the Doc who. The dude's just in it, right? Mm. And, you know, we see in William Finnegan this, like, obsession with surfing, and he, like, has emotions and feelings about it. I don't know if the Doc operates that way. The dude kind of, like, there's waves, let's go surfing. I mean, like, fearless, like, cowabunga kind of
very,
shit.
Very cowabunga. And he's cool, too. I think, you know, when you think about, like, growing up and, like, I think he's, like, the type of dude that I would like to see myself in when I'm, like, 50. Like, professionally has it on lockdown. He's a doctor. He has a practice. He's like established professionally, but he doesn't lose that wild side of himself where he's not afraid to go out and ride the 15-foot waves.
Yeah, I think a lot like everyone growing up has a friend who has like a cool dad.
Cool. Doc's a cool dad.
Yeah.
You some of your friends had cool dads?
Yeah, I had his name was also. I'm laughing because we used to call him Doc. Also, he was
really?
He was not a doctor. Don't know why that nickname started.
He was a doctor behind the bar.
Yeah, there you go. For sure, had some of my first underage beers in his presence.
Of course.
My man still rides a Ducati 999 Superbike.
Oof, let me see what that looks like.
Pull it up. Spiciest bike on the market. It's actually been off the market for a while now. But
this looks like straight out of like 1997.
At the time, I'm like 16, and like my back can't even support riding on that thing.
This looks pretty sick. What color did he have?
Red, of course. The premier Italian sports bike.
Sick.
Yeah, but he was the same way, man. Passionate, loved riding. He had a bunch of cool hobbies like that. But go over and he was just there. Had a great job. Worked for Bear Stearns, R.I.P.
R.I.P. for sure.
But prior to that whole pulling down the American economy thing, was pulling in the bills and would come home. We'd be hanging out in their house and. He'd be like, all right, boys, I'm going out for a ride. And you hear this thing start up, and it's like the whole house shakes. That's actually exactly what it sounded like now. And would hop on and ride away. And I was like, shit, man, my dad builds computers. So,
yeah. Hey, man. But no one thinks their dad's the cool dad.
That's very true, yeah. Good point. Except for Doc's kids. And yeah, Doc's bucket for sure. I don't even know if he has kids.
It's crazy, man. So I think, bringing up Doc brings up an interesting point in the book. It's like there's... And you kind of mentioned this earlier, for the author, William, there's such clear stages in his life. And like each one's kind of marked by who he's surfing with. Very early on, it's Glenn and Glenn's younger brother, whose name is escaping me, in Hawaii. So when he's younger, it's these guys, these Hawaiian guys who kind of introduce him to surfing. Early on in the book,
I was going to say that's an interesting early on in the book. I mean, so he's like a young teenager, around 12, 13, 14,
young.
And gets brought into Hawaii. His family just moves there. And he talks about like being in these public schools. He drops a line like, pretty much if you are a white kid and you go to Hawaii, you go to private school, except my parents didn't do that.
Right.
So he's like around all these different kind of racial clashes that he doesn't know anything about because he grew up in like Orange County, California, where everyone's like white with blonde hair.
Yeah.
And then he goes there, and to him, they're all just like Hawaiians, but it turns out it's like way deeper than that. And there's kind of different, the locals and whatever, and different forms of natives. And he's kind of like unapologetic about the fact that he's like went there and got his ass kicked and had to kick a couple of people's asses, and like that's just how life was.
Yeah, he's super honest about that, and I think it's. For people listening, there's some interesting noise in the background, but
we'll roll with it.
We'll roll with it.
Do it live.
But we're cognizant here at Gramercy Reading Club. We think about the viewers first, so stick with us through this interesting sound. Anyways, he is very honest. Yeah, like he just goes to this new town, is super, like sticks out super hard because he's white. And it was interesting to hear about those fights. Like I feel like, would that happen in 2017? Maybe. But I feel like people just like beat the shit out of each other all the time. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was definitely fights like where I grew up, but like he makes it sound like every single day it was like Fight Club.
Yeah, but I think the fights, teenage boys will be teenage boys to a certain extent. But I think the driver of the fight was different. Like, when I was in high school or there or middle school even, and I mean, there was like little scuffles, but think about what they were about. Like, some girls, something like that. These were like, kind of like race wars almost. I mean, and he doesn't draw the light to it like that and try to make some grand social statement, but is honest about the fact that it's not just tuffles. I mean, there are fundamental differences, and like because of the way you look, I'm going to beat you up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's deeper. That's deep. That's a deep cut. Brawling over race.
Yeah, and something. I mean, maybe I just connected this for the first time, but he goes and race there, and he doesn't touch on it too hard in the book, but William Finnegan, I guess notable to point out, is a longtime New Yorker reporter, and written a bunch of books mostly on like apartheid and war correspondence in kind of Africa and a lot of kind of race issues going on there. So
maybe some of these early experiences with the effect that race has on groups kind of informed the path he took as a writer, as a reporter.
For sure.
So he starts off, and it's really like his life and his surfing life is really defined by Glenn and Glenn's brother and these guys in Hawaii who kind of show him what surfing is. He then meets, who's the guy he meets when he goes back to California? Like he was a popular kid.
Dominic, I believe.
Dominic. Yeah. He meets Dominic. That's kind of the next like chapter, like not literally but figuratively in his life.
It's Dominic.
It's definitely Dominic. It sounds right.
Cool.
And then he goes, and then Bryan's like, I would say Bryan's like the line share.
Yeah, I mean, Bryan's like a third of the book.
And then it's kind of the doc. And then who's the guy he meets when he moves to New York when he's older? The dancer dude.
Yeah.
So the only reason I bring this up is just like it's so. it's interesting too because he's older. You know, what is he? 60 years old, William Finnegan.
Now, yeah,
maybe
60,
so. Like he has this perspective on life where he can look like you and I can look back on our life and be like, oh yeah, when I was in 5th grade, I hung out with this person. When I was in 10th grade, I hung out with that person. But he really has 60, 70 years under his belt where he can like truly say this decade of my life was defined by surfing with this person. Mm-hmm. I think that retrospective and being able to see that over the course of a period of time it's interesting and it's something that you can't fake that. Like you have to live those years, have those relationships, surf with those people to really be able to put pen to paper about that.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it is I guess he's always been a writer. I mean, so that helps with it. But it's always interested me how writers can like have this incredible recall and like I mean, and you know that they're like rebuilding some conversations to the best of their ability, but. But like, man, I mean, I'm significantly younger than William Finnegan and trying to think back to like when I was 12, who I was hanging out with and where I was doing it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess when you have experience, it's a lot easier if you think about, okay, when you were 12, you went on vacation to Mexico. Who was on that trip with you?
Totally.
And I guess if he that's why breaking them out into sections of, you know, locations and things like that kind of help.
Yeah, it has those like markers.
Yeah. Pinpoints on the map almost and like can recreate the stories through them.
He that's an interesting point you brought up about how he remembers things so well, because I watched an interview with him after I finished reading the book and he talks about that specific thing. He's like, you know, I've realized some of these things were 40, 50 years ago. So what he said was he kind of wrote down his thoughts on what had happened in that period of his life, and then went back and met with the people involved, met with Bryan DeSalvatore, met with his girlfriend from the time and said like, hey, this is kind of how I remember these things happening. Like, is it true? And he said some people were like, yeah, like totally, like you're spot on. Other people were like, you're out of your mind. Like, this is not how things happen. So I think he did a little bit of internal like memory and then really relied on people outside of him to like fact check the stuff that he had written down. I
think fact checking is a funny topic to bring up because he talks about it in here in the book about fact checking each other on wave sizes, right? It's like any other competition between males, right? It's mine was bigger, but the metric of measuring waves and also celebrating was an interesting thing. And I mean, you said before, but I have to imagine he's one of the most humble surfers there has ever been, on top of other things.
He's super humble. Because and you look at the pictures in the book, he's shredding some serious waves.
Yeah, one of them, if you just do the math with the date, you're like, this dude's like 56, 57 right now.
And he's shredding. Like, right here in Long Island. There's a couple of quotes I wanted to go through that I'd pinpointed in the book.
Sure.
And just kind of see where those kind of take us. I think this was a good one. I read really early on. Was the old school masculinity, the old school masculinity that so many people, including me, found attractive, carried with it no small loneliness. And to me, this was like, and when you think about like that old school manly man, the guy's guy, hardened, unempathetic, but in like a useful way, not willing to concede on what he believes. There's a loneliness in that because it requires you to be isolated from those around you to maintain some of those boundaries that then empower that type of solidarity.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was like a super interesting quote about
definitely tied to like suppressing your feelings on things, on topics. Sure. And I mean, and maybe I think one of your original questions to me was, do you think, just summarizing, but do you think all of this surfing story is at the expense of some other things, family life and stuff? And it's like, that quote kind of says it all, I think.
It does. And there's some loneliness in that.
Let me side question you real quick. I see you whipping around with your this nifty quote feature you got in the Kindle. What's the digital reading life like? I imagine some of the viewers out there are split between I'm a big paper book guy, like the physical.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's good. I mean, I was dead set on physical books for the longest time. I love holding the book. I love being able to like peel it open, just jump to a page super quickly. And then, funny enough, what brought me, and I've used the Kindle sparingly, but what brought me back to the Kindle is I went to Spain. As you probably know, I brought Barbarian Days with me. and got all of my stuff stolen on the last day of my trip in Barcelona. RIP. It's all good. Lost my phone, keys, wallet, passport. So I'm riding. I'll just tell you the story real quick. I was riding a moped through the city of Barcelona, park it, put my bag down. Thought I told my girlfriend to watch the bag. I didn't tell her to watch it. We then go.
Time out. Oh, this is great. You take the fall for this one. She's not listening.
I don't know what happened. I don't know.
Continue.
I thought I told her to please watch the bag. Maybe she didn't hear me say watch the bag.
It's like he's thinking for the first time maybe that this might be.
So here's the deal. You ask her, she says I didn't say watch the bag. You ask me, I thought I said watch the bag. The point is neither of us watched the bag, so it doesn't really matter who said what. We left the bag unattended. I put the bag down. I go to park the moped. These things are pretty tight. I was whipping it. Go to park it. I come back, and my girlfriend's sitting on the bench. I'm like, hey, where's the bag? And she's like, hey, where's the bag? And we both were like, where's the bag? And we just there was a miscommunication, and the bag got stolen, and phone, keys, wallet, passport. Point being, my copy of Barbarian Days was in there.
The biggest loss of all, for sure.
Biggest loss, for sure. Credit cards, passport, iPhone, who cares? I lost Barbarian Days. Luckily, I brought my Kindle with me because there was a few other books I'd wanted to read on the trip on my Kindle. So I re-downloaded Barbarian Days so I could finish it on the plane ride home. And that's why I've been using the Kindle. But to answer your question, the Kindle's tight. Like, you can have 70 books with you, which would be like so cumbersome if they were in hard copies or whatever. And this note feature's sick. So because like I never took notes on books, but a little background, like, so you and I are in a book club together, right, with some of our friends from college. That kind of inspired what we're doing here. And, you know, a big part of that's discussion. We drink a little wine, we eat some food, do whatever, and we want to talk. And, like, there's always, I remember being in those discussions and, like, that quote was sick. Like, I wanted to reference that quote, and I never could because I didn't write it down. I don't always have a pen on me, whatever. So you can highlight notes in this, write down, like, a little line, like, old school masculinity, for example, was the note on that quote, and just super easily reference them.
It's way better than I dog ear pages, and then you, like, go back to it and you have to, like, read the whole page again. You're like, what was I even trying to get out of this one?
So why is no one selling a bookmark that has a pen on it?
It's a great question.
About to brand those Gramercy Reading Club bookmarks with pens.
Coming to you soon.
Coming to you soon. All right, I have some other quotes. Is it cool if I go through them?
Absolutely. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, I'm just, I want to make sure if you have some things you want to share. Here we go. I like this a lot. What was consistent was a certain serenity that followed a rigorous session. It was physical, this post-surf mood, but it had a distinct emotionality too. Sometimes it was mild elation. Often it was a pleasant melancholy. After particularly intense tubes or wipeouts, I felt a charged and wild inclination to weep, which could last for hours. It was like the gamut of powerful feelings that can follow heartfelt sex.
Shit, I need to start surfing.
Definitely need to start surfing if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, the beginning part of it, I would kind of go back to a kind of metaphor I used before. I think it's relatable. The Friday Night Lights kind of feeling, like you finish a game, any sporting event, and the crowd cheering. I mean, hopefully tie it to a win, I would hope.
Ideally.
But you kind of have that, like, I did it kind of, and you're sore and tired, but it doesn't matter because you're done and you did it. The second part of it, though, I mean, to the point that you wanted to weep and, feels like you just had sex. I guess my high school football games weren't that good. But powerful stuff. I mean, and you could see why he keeps going back for more kind of thing.
What position did you play in football?
I was a left tackle.
Left tackle. What number did you wear?
Number 71.
71.
Everyone's always like, left side. They're like, oh, blind side. I'm like, yeah.
You're Michael Orr.
Except our quarterback was a lefty, so the right side was the blind side.
Oh, true.
But I didn't tell anyone that.
You Michael Orr.
I mean, it looks, for sure.
Okay, I got some other quotes here.
Hit me with them.
Here was a large, awkward member of the global ruling elite who had probably spent more in an air travel day than anyone on Nias could make in a year of hard work, all for the pleasure of leaving an unimaginably rich, clean place for this desperately poor, unhealthy place. Here he was struggling blindly down the road under an enormous pack, disoriented and ignorant and sweating like a donkey. He wanted to see Asia from the ground, not from the Hilton height of some air-conditioned resort that any sane person would prefer. The complex ambition and aversion that brought the poor backpacker 7,000 miles to struggle and suffer from dysentery, heat stroke, or worse, in the equatorial jungle, anything to be a traveler and not a tourist, or perhaps impossible to untangle. But it was all well known that he brought so little money that he was hardly worth hustling. I think that quote for me was interesting because the way he described, like the self-awareness of being an American traveling in a foreign third world country, I thought that was really astute. Basically, he's like, I know who I am, and I know I'm taking this super hard route to have this trip and have this experience, and he's aware of that. And I think so often, many people are not aware of that, myself included. So I just thought that was like, it was really cool of him to be so self-aware.
Yeah. I mean, I think he calls out. We talked about the Into the Wild kind of story earlier. I think it's really relatable. I mean, at that point in the story, he's mid-20s, and I think it's I mean, I can speak personally, a pretty relatable like thing that at least guys do. The like, quit my job, travel the world kind of thing.
For sure.
And I live in New York City. There's these poor places all over the world, and then you go and you realize that you're just kind of like a tourist there, and you're not actually changing or solving a lot of issues. And I think just the honesty and willingness to call himself out on it, or see what he's doing for what it is.
Yeah.
Not that it's a bad thing, but just kind of an honest viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. It is. Let's get one more quote up, and we can nix the quotes. But there was one more I wanted to share. Yeah. Cool. So, for me, and not only for me, surfing harbors this paradox: a desire to be alone with waves, fused to an equal desire to be watched, to perform. And that that one, and it was just like, oh, what are your thoughts on that quote?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before. It's such the solitary sport, right? But you need to be in the zone and do it yourself. But is it real if no one's there to watch? That's why he's always with his buddies there. Mm-hmm. And, going back to the happiness is only real when shared. Maybe
Facts.
If you catch the perfect wave and no one's there to see it,
did you actually
catch it?
Yeah, 100%. And it is such an exhibitionist sport, surfing, in a way, because especially now it's so high profile, everyone knows about it, and when you're on the beach, especially a crowded beach, no one would disagree. I think that surfers catch everyone's eyes. You see the surfer, you're like, oh cool, there's a surfer. It just has this allure to it. Mm-hmm. So it is in that way very like a look at me sport. And I think a lot of surfers probably like that, although they may not admit that. But then at the same time, surfing is such an isolated, lonely sport. It's like wrestling, for example. It's like, it is just you. There's no one else. If something goes wrong, it's on you. If you did great, it's on you. I think that dichotomy is really interesting. I think the way he explains it, I'm not a surfer, the way he writes that, it's like, oh, I kind of get that.
Yeah, in Madeira, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, Madeira off of Portugal, one of the islands, kind of in his older age, his adult years, he kind of travels to every year or so. He talks about over the years there. I mean, at this point, it's known for some of the best waves in the world, and there's regular competitions there. When he first gets there, though, few had ever surfed there. And he talks about the villagers there. At first, they come out and they watch them, and they're clapping and they're cheering and all this stuff. And by the time it's evolved, and some of the locals there are surfers, and just by nature of living next to some of the best waves in the world are very good surfers. There's such a danger associated with it, and people kind of see it for what it is, of this potentially people go kind of crazy with power type thing. The locals don't like it, local kids getting killed or hurt, and they kind of shun it because it's created this whole tourism industry there that's to the Western world, we've made their island better. To their eyes, maybe not so much, and kind of shows some of that cockiness, if you will, or the self-interest involved.
For sure. All right, man. Final thoughts on the book. Do you have any other thoughts? Do you have any other major topics within the book? Because I'm ready for them. I'm also ready for final thoughts, but I don't want to jump to final thoughts if you're not ready for final thoughts.
I think I'm ready for some final thoughts.
Ready for some final? Yes. Marcelo, are we good for some final thoughts?
I approve.
He approves. Yeah, if Marcelo approves, we're good.
Yeah, I mean,
Marcel.
so.
Oh, go ahead. What's your Instagram, Marcel?
Morris Alba. Underscore.
At Morris Alba.
That's my band's Instagram.
That's it.
Oh, he's got a
I was
band.
about to say Morris Alba.
Maybe we get them.
You're not Morris Alba, but that's your band. What type of music do you guys play?
Rock music.
Rock music. Like what?
Equate yourself to someone.
Yeah. I low key don't like when people are like, oh, what type of music do you make? Like, who you like? I think it's like kind of a lazy comparison, but who are you like?
I really like punk rock. But
Okay.
I also really like folk music, and I really like hip hop.
Punk rock, folk music, and hip hop.
Yeah, well, it's more backbeat.
More back.
The hip hop influence, nothing else. Really.
So would you say those three coalesce in your music?
Definitely the first two.
The first two.
The last is just more for like rhythm.
We're gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, I might have to play
Big
some
on
of those.
polyrhythms.
All right. Morris Alba. You heard it here first. So, didn't mean to cut you off. Final thoughts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, which shouldn't necessarily dictate my opinion. I will say though, Pulitzer
sign.
Prize for me is like it's my Oscars, if you will, kind of my Academy, right? There's some other book awards out there that I view as like my equivalent of like the MTV Music Awards. Like no one's like going to see a movie because it won like the Teen Choice Awards or anything like that. But the Pulitzer, I've read a number of them, and I've generally approved of all of them. So that was one of the first things that made me pick up this book in the first place, and held true to it. William Finnegan, excellent writer. I think it's funny he's written a bunch of books on kind of his war correspondent and political reporter kind of thing, which I believe are all well regarded. And now in his older age, throughout a kind of personal story, takes home the Pulitzer with it, which awesome for him.
Amazing.
But I love the way his ability to, I mean, you guys heard the quotes there, his ability to kind of capture thoughts that would otherwise be maybe uncomfortable for someone to put out there, and kind of keep you with the story. And important to note, I mean, we haven't talked about this, but of this 400-page book, I bet 175 pages of it are just sheer wave descriptions.
So true. We really didn't talk about that part of the book.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And it's, sure, it gets old because you just keep hearing about waves, which, if you're not a surfer, you don't know exactly what it means. But kind of by the end of the book, I did know what it meant. And he describes waves so delicately and so intentionally that, it's not just every big wave he caught was like, oh, here we go, another one. I mean, they're big in different ways, right? Like different characteristics almost. I don't know if you want to say something like that.
Yeah, the way I think he writes about waves with the same level of detail and with the same infusion of imagery that he does with all other things in his life.
Yeah.
And for the uninitiated, for the non-surfer, it's really illuminating how much he knows about a given wave.
Yeah, it's almost like his lack of explanation around his various girlfriends and his wife and daughter in it is like made up, and that the emotion you would expect to be placed there is really seen in his love story with waves and surfing. And kind of maybe that's my final thoughts. Is this is a love letter to surfing from William Finnegan. I mean, he's got, from what you read here and what I've read outside of this, a pretty awesome and incredible book-worthy life outside of surfing. But he's here to tell you about surfing, and and it pulls you in, and you're there every step of the way. And I went into this book, like I said, with a mild interest in surfing, really something I want to get into and try. And I came out of this like, wow, I don't know if I like have what it takes to put in that level of dedication. I mean, it is a passion.
Strong. It is a passion, and it makes you think, maybe it's not for me.
Yeah.
The way he writes about it. Final thoughts, and then we can do scores. I'll give you my final thoughts, and then we'll do scores.
All right.
Final thoughts. Barbarian Days is, in as many ways, pontification upon life. Like, what does it mean to grow up and go through being 10 years old in a new place? Have your girlfriend cheat on you with your best friend, with your boy. Go and travel the world for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and totally leave behind any notion of this American dream that so many of your friends are back in the States chasing. Then grow up and get married and have a kid and live in New York and be an author. And so he writes this like really like nice story about, for lack of a better term, about like growing up as a person, an American person. But then paralleled with that is this amazing story about surfing, and surfing is so consistent in his life. He meets a new girl, the waves are there to calm him down if he's nervous about it. He gets married, the waves are there to serve as like a backdrop at his wedding or his friend's wedding.
Day.
Exactly, on his wedding. He is stressed out about writing a book or writing an article, and the waves are always there when he's on site writing in a foreign country. So it's like, so I think it's so interesting and beautiful about how the waves are always there to complement the things he's doing in his everyday life. And I loved his prose. I think he wrote so accurately. And in this book, more than any book I can think of recently, I had so many of those moments where you're like, oh shit, like I felt that before, I just never knew how to articulate it. Like he does that so well. It's like, oh, I know exactly what you're saying. I just never thought of how to write it like that and put it into those words. So I amazing. Really, 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 really good book.
Yeah, I agree.
Scores. You go first.
Scores. I mean, it's hard because what is it? No, we're going 1 to 10.
1 to 10, no round numbers.
1 to 10, no round numbers.
You do a round number, you're never coming on the podcast.
It's just
again,
lazy.
It's
lazy if you do a round number.
Yeah, extremely.
Oh shit.
I'm hitting it with an 8.8.
8.8?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
talk about that.
So for me, like, I don't know if I'm ever like, I'm waiting for the book between 9.0 and 10.0. Like, I'm waiting to get there. So 8.8 is really high for me.
Strong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking to like cry after reading a book that's like a 9.2. Kind of like how he feels about surfing. Like, I'm waiting for the book that makes me feel about that.
I got you.
But yeah, an 8.8. Just there's no one I wouldn't recommend this book to. I mean, my boys, I'll give it to my mom. I mean, I think there's something for her to learn here. My friends, for sure. I mean, as a young male, pick up this book and read it.
8.8. On that point, Oprah loves this book. I swear it's on the back cover.
It's kind of like my mom.
Yeah, it's kind of like everyone's mom. So you and I have obviously spoken about this book through the lens of a young man.
Yeah.
Because that's the lens we have, but it's really for everyone. Score. I'm going to give Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life by William Finnegan 9.2.
Whoa.
9.2. That's a 9.2 out of 10, folks. It was so well written. It's like, I feel like I'm not a writer per se. I feel like it's your favorite writer's favorite writer. Like, I feel like he writes so well, so the way he writes sentences is just like so strong. Like and that sounds basic, but like he just writes awesome sentences.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Pulitzer thing, kind of the reason I said is because there's great stories and then there's great writing, and it's like a beautiful thing when those line up, right?
Totally.
And I think it's kind of happened.
And those two meet right here in this book. So strong 9.2 out of 10. The things that led to that was just amazing writing, great story, very relatable for me. And like some of the for me, for like what really gave it that 9.2 was like so much of that like oh shit moments where he says something I've felt so many times so strongly but can never articulate. He brings those things to life. So I'm gonna have to give it a 9.2.
Awesome.
All right, man. Well, that's podcast 1 in the books.
Podcast 1, book 1. Many books to come.
Many books to come. Thanks for coming on Sunday evening. Appreciate you making some time.
Absolutely, anytime.
Let's get out of here.